In the before time, there was no breath, no dreaming, only the great emptiness. There was no word, no language even to describe this, no thought even to imagine it. It went on for a long time, although there was no time to measure it. And then something happened. Out of the before time, there came an inhale, an exhale, a contraction, an explosive expansion, a tearing apart of what will be from what was not. And that which was the singularity divided itself into parts, darkness from light, earth from sky, water from land, each broken off from the whole, but a part of the whole. And a vessel was made to contain the presence of what will be, to give it shape and to nurture it. And the what will be became the moon, the stars, and the sun. It became plants, trees, moss, and lichen. The what will be became the sea and all the creatures that swam, the sky and all the creatures that flew, the land masses and all the creatures that crawled, walked, and ran. And there was a harmony, a balance, a blending of all the many parts, each separate but connected, all from the same source. And the vessel filled with the intensity of so much beingness that it burst into fragments, spilling the light of what will be. And after a while, a certain creature was created who could recognize the shards of light and begin to collect them. Creatures who could repair the vessel. The light of what will be would be gathered in the vessel, repaired by the way these creatures chose to live their lives. Everything they need to do this task was provided for them. They only had to recognize it. There is no word for the time it will take to accomplish this task. That achieved in the beginning.
Yeah. Can you use the other mic? It seems I could hardly hear it.
I am so sorry to hear that.
No, it's probably me.
Well, I turned on the switch.
It's just more clear with that.
All right, I'm cool with that. All right. So Bereshit, it's the first word in Torah, the first word in what we call the Old Testament in the Christian tradition. And it is usually translated as in the beginning, but everything that I just said can be said in that one word, in the sounds, in the, what we call letters that make up that one word.
Could you please say it again?
Bereshit, Bereshit, in the beginning, or everything that I just said. Rosh Hashanah happened earlier this week, and Yom Kippur happens next week. It's a 10-day gap. It's the first 10 days of the year in the ancient Hebrew tradition that is maintained by our Jewish brothers and sisters today. It is the high holy days. It is the days of awe. I actually have a book, The Days of Awe, stories for the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah and a few others. The days of awe because we're awestruck by the in the beginning. We're awestruck by the interconnectedness of all this. We are awestruck by the awareness that it is us who were created to restore the vessel that contains the light of what will be. Whew. That is us. And it happens by how we live our lives. And so for this 10 days, God has taken notice of how we've been living our lives in the Jewish tradition. And on Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, God writes down in his book all the ways we've helped make the vessel come together and all the ways we kind of fell short and didn't quite help. But we have 10 days to reflect on that. 10 days to think about how we've been living our lives. 10 days to reconnect with the divine source that is everywhere around us and expressing through us as us. And during this time, there are extra prayers and there are all kinds of things that one can do to facilitate the process. And at the end of the 10 days, we come to the day that is known as Yom Kippur. Now, if you grew up in a Jewish household, whether you were religious or not, these 10 days were the most important days, period. It's more than likely we're gone home. You know, it's the one period of the year that rabbis can be absolutely sure their synagogues will be full. And as people return home and they go into the synagogue, all kinds of things happen. Remember the guy who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie? He wrote another book about what happened when he went home for the High Holy Days, right? Beautiful little book, Faith, something about faith. I've forgotten the title, it's terrible, but I love the little book. And he's attending the services, and the rabbi is the man who was the rabbi when he was a little boy. And at one point he goes up and he chats with the rabbi a little bit, and the rabbi says, "I'd like to talk with you." And the rabbi says, when they get alone together, he says, "I would like you to write my eulogy." Now this is a non-practicing, everywhere in the world except home guy, right? And the rabbi is saying he wants him to write his eulogy. So the story is the unfolding of Mitch's rediscovery of his faith through the process of describing the life of his rabbi. It's a beautiful book. So some of us remember that Jewish holy days start at sunset and go to the next sunset. Every day starts at sunset and goes to the next sunset. So Rosh Hashanah starts at sunset and goes through the next sunset. And as you go into this first day, there's special meals. And last year I was able to do it, this year I wasn't able. One of them is to offer sweet things. So this is blintzes and this is, all kinds of fun things. It's also sliced apple dipped in honey to remind us of the sweetness of life. And that's right before, that's the evening meal before Rosh Hashanah. And then during the day on Rosh Hashanah, you begin the process of letting go of what may no longer serve you because it was a separation from the source. It wasn't contributing to restoring the battle. Wow. Restoring the vessel. Right? And some of you may recall, if you've been active in the social activist world for a while, there was a wonderful journal called Tikkun. Remember that? Well, the act of Tikkun is restoring the vessel. Every time we act in alignment, we are restoring that vessel that broke because the potential was so incredible. Oh my goodness, let us restore it so that the potential can be known and experienced, the possibilities, right? So the first step in beginning to let go is something called tashlich, and I did it again. Little crumbs in a packet. This is paper towel, so don't throw it in, it won't dissolve. Okay? Little crumbs in a packet that you toss into flowing water to say, I'm done, I release. This no longer has any impact. I no longer hang on to this for anything I did or anyone else did that I'm holding against them, because resentment is also a step off the path. So we can pass this around as I continue. If you're a couple, you probably need to share it. I think there's about 35 or 40 in there. So as the 10 days unfold, we take the time to stop and look. What's happened over the last year? What is it that I have said I would do that I didn't do? What is it that I told God, I made the sacred vow that I would, and whoops, I forgot. What is it that I promised myself and then I haven't followed through on? What is it that God has asked us to do that I haven't followed through on? So we take the time and we use these crumbs. Now these crumbs are the very, very symptomatic or symbolic residue of what happened when the word Rosh Hashanah was invented. Rosh means head. And in fact, in Babylon and Chaldea, it was the head of the prize bullock that was put into the river on Rosh Hashanah. It was actually a head that was thrown in. We'll do crumbs instead. And these are animal cracker crumbs, so. All right. So as the 10 days are going through and we're praying and we're reflecting, there's something that we're aware of, and that is that on Yom Kippur, something is going to be happening. Now, on Rosh Hashanah, God has opened the book of judgment, which is opened the book of awareness, where he keeps track for us of what it is that we are experiencing, where the beings of light know for us and with us what it is that we are ready to move on from and move on to. But on Yom Kippur, that book is sealed, and the next year is determined by what was put in that book for last year. So if I have been too far off the track last year, karma says I might get it back next year. Even though there isn't the word karma in the Jewish tradition. Thank you, dear. So I want to make sure that it's not written into the book of judgment. It's not sealed, all right? So before sunset, we start to gather in the synagogue. Now, Yom Kippur is a day of fasting. There's been a great party the day before. Got to have a feast. Every holy day, got to have a feast. But it's the day before Yom Kippur. And at sunset, we stop eating and drinking. Anything, not even a sip of water. And we spend much of the day in the synagogue or the temple. And then before sunset, there's actually been 5 prayers. This is 4 prayers so far. This is the 5th prayer, set of prayers. When the congregation is gathered, the ark is opened. Now, the ark is where the Torah is stored. It's this big golden thing usually, and it usually has beautiful, beautiful art on it. I was in the home of a Jewish family a couple of weekends ago, and he was an architect, and one of his glories was the time he got to design the ark for a synagogue. He's just so happy about that, right? So it's got these beautiful designs on it, and 2 people have been trained to be able to do this. Are taken and they go up and they open the ark and they pull out the scrolls that are Torah, and they really are scrolls. And there are people whose only job is to copy Torah, and not a jot or a tittle. And those are actual symbols in Hebrew, may be changed. Isn't that beautiful? So they open the ark, they take out the Torah, and then they stand one on each side of the Hazah, which is the pulpit. And then they recite in concert words that are not recited at any other service. And that's why I have notes. Be'yishaha shel ma'ayah is the beginning. Be'yishaha. In the tribunal of heaven and the tribunal of earth, by the permission of God, blessed be his holy name, and by the permission of this holy congregation, we hold it lawful to pray with those who have transgressed. Because in the temple, you cannot pray with anyone who is not in purified mind state. So they open this. They have basically made the synagogue a temple. And they have said it's okay if you're not fully purified. We can pray together anyway. And that is followed by a phrase that, again, is never said any other day of the year. Kol nidre, please, Lord, accept them. May all of them be transformed, that they will return to Thee with all our hearts from this day of atonement to the next. There's so much commentary on the Kol Nidre out there, and it's a great sigh. It's the only thing that is said this way. It's said in Aramaic. This isn't even Hebrew. This is so old, it's before the temples. It's something people were saying ahead of time before they got into the actual prayer. All those promises we made to ourselves and to others and to God, just transform them, please. That's really what it's saying. And for a long time, this was a real problem, because when the Gentiles read or heard about this prayer, they thought that it was an attempt to break all the contracts that the Jews had entered into during the year. And so it became one of the tools that some of the Europeans used against their Jewish neighbors. But today, we know better. Today we know this is not about any business. This is only about our hearts and our connection with the divine. That we may be cleared of any attempts that we have made inappropriately or any forgetting that we have been doing. And really, the word sin in Hebrew means steps off the path. The old version of the Lord's Prayer is more accurate when it says, forgive us our trespasses. We stepped off the path onto somebody else's land. In Greek, it's the word that is translated as sin is, missed the mark. It's an archery term. But in Hebrew, it's, I stepped off the path. So, I'm ready to let go of all the times I stepped off the path. I'm ready to step back on the path. And I'm ready to not count it against me or anybody else that I have. Now, Yom Kippur is a very special day. It's the Sabbath of Sabbaths. It's the day that we are truly feeling at one with the divine. It's pronounced in English, the Day of Atonement. It's pronounced in the Course in Miracles, the Day of Atonement. It is the day when we are at one with ourselves, with each other, and with the Source. And so we don't do anything that would have us feeling separate. And one of the things that's considered a minor sort of prohibition is we don't wear leather shoes on Yom Kippur, because we would have had to kill something, and it would be walking on their skin. Usually people wear white. This is the only white thing I have. Because it's a sign of the purity, the purification that we are going through, the releasing of anything other than the purity. But I love white, because although in the fabric it means there is no color, but in light it is all the colors combined. Is that not wonderful? You don't wash or bathe on Yom Kippur. So much people wash the night before. They have very purifying, symbolic swimming, submerging in living water, flowing water. And no lotions or perfumes. Okay? So can you imagine all day, no eating, no drinking, and no one has anything on to it, and they can't wash, and no one has anything on to cover up the odors. And by the end of the day, it's a very solemn group.
I think so.
And after the words that I have just said and sung, there is just your normal Sabbath service, as if it were a normal Sabbath. But it ends with a prayer that is recited more often than any other prayer in all of the Hebrew world, all of Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. One. They're Unitarians. And the next line is going to sound really familiar. Blessed be his glorious kingdom forever and ever. Baruch Shem Kavod, Malchut HaOlechem Vayeh. Those of you who are raised in the Christian tradition, when the disciples asked their beloved teacher to teach them how to pray, he was a rabbi. And he said, you know, you've been taught these long prayers. Shem Yisrael, this prayer, we're familiar with the first couple of lines. It goes on for pages. It's a quote, lots of verses from Deuteronomy, lots of quotes from Leviticus. It goes on forever and ever, and they're going, do we have to pray like that? And he says, oh no. Just remember the key points. And the prayer that we have been taught as the Lord's Prayer is a summary. It's a summary of the daily prayers of all the Jewish people everywhere. As the Shema Yisrael begins to emerge and unfold, it says, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. You may recall last time I was here, I was talking about idolatries, how easy it is to love something else and forget the source of our life, the nurturer and protector of our life. And then the next line, and these words that I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall speak of them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. As you said, love is at the front of our mind. This is what Shem Yisrael is saying. Keep the love at the front of the mind. Keep the awareness that we are all one. There is only one. All that is only one. Fully interconnected. All loving. All beauty. All wisdom. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes. If you've seen a very conservative Jewish man, I'll have this thing here. It's the commandments tied to his forehead. It shall be here. Yes? And you shall write them on the doorposts on your gates and on your house. You know the little, this is it, right? Yeah. These are to remind us over and over again, Shem Yisrael, the Lord your God is one. And if you know this and feel this, then everything unfolds from there. So the tune and the tone of these 10 days is awakening awareness, becoming awakened aware. But it's also moving into that deep connection that we call prayer. And it's also recognizing the ways in which we haven't quite met our goals. We haven't quite been all the things that we would like to be or that we are capable of being. And that's okay. And then there is one more thing. Caritas. Caritas. It's translated, depending on who's writing it, as either charity or love. And it's acting from the heart. Caritas. How can we act from the heart? And so during this time, especially on Rosh Hashanah, but also during the whole week, there will be people coming to the door. And they will say, have you got a little something? Is there something you could share? And there's a lovely story in this book about Rivka. Rivka, her husband is a glove maker. You can imagine how much they have to live on. But Rivka can stretch anything. And she has managed to take the last little bit of flour out of the bin, and she's been able to make 2 small challah. Challah is that braided bread for the Sabbath eve. And that's what they're going to have for their feast on Rosh Hashanah. And she's been able to pull out a little bit of the dried beef, what we call jerky, and turn it into a bit of a stew with an old potato or two. And so they're going to have a Rosh Hashanah feast. And all day long, the beggars come to the door. Have you got a little something that you can share? But this is a season of Caritas, and she can always find out something to share. And this one time that someone comes to the door, and she opens the door, and oh my goodness, it's a very tall man in a very white uniform. And he says, "Excuse me, but the neighbors tell me you could be a very good caretaker, and I've been sent off to the other parts of the world for 7 years, and I have this samovar. It's been in my family for generations. Please, would you take care of my samovar until I return?" And she didn't hear the 7 years. And then she says, "And how long?" He says, "Oh, I'll see you in 7 years." She goes, "What?" So she opens this bag, and in this bag is an ancient blackened samovar. That's the Russian tea maker server thing, right? And so Rivka puts it high on she tries to polish it, but forget it. It's not polishing. So she puts it high on her shelf. And there's another knock at the door. And she went, "Oh my." She's thinking maybe he's going to be back and give her more instructions. So she opens the door, and it's a beggar saying, "Have you got a little something to share?" And Rivka digs around in her pockets, and she has a penny. The equivalent of a penny. And she says, "This is all I've got." And he says, "Well, if it's all you've got, it's marvelous. It's more than enough." And he goes on. And then she takes the challah out of the oven, and it's beautiful. It's tiny. There's 2 little tiny challah. And as she's taking it out, she looks out the window, and she sees that her widowed neighbor, who is living on nothing, is walking by, and she taps on the window, and she says, Stop. Here, I have your challah for your feast." And she gives her the challah. So she goes back to cleaning up her kitchen, and she looks up, and lo and behold, 2 shiny strips of brass are showing through this blackened finish. How could this be? Well, then her husband comes home, and he says, "You will not believe what happened to me today. I was just closing up the shop, and there was this carriage, and it stopped in front of the shop, and this very rich man got out of the shop, and he stood in front of the window. And the only thing in the window is those gloves that I made for so-and-so who died, and his widow wouldn't accept them anymore, and they've been there. I've been trying to sell them for months." And the nobleman looks at them, and he says, "Fine work." Come on. He taps on the window. He insists that I reopen the shop, and he comes in and he says, "How much for those fine gloves?" And the glove maker says, "Well, 5 crowns, sir." And the guy says, "Oh, no. These are worth far more than that. Here's 100 crowns. Oh my goodness. And then he says, "And I want 10 more pair just like that. Here's 1,000. Oh, nothing like this has ever happened to Rivka and her husband before. How could this possibly be?" And then she begins to put it together. The samovar is showing them the way. And so she says, "Trust me on this." And she takes all but a least little bit of all the money into the marketplace. And she goes to the fishmonger, who still has this one fish, with one great fish for the feast. And it hasn't been able to sell because times are bad. Everyone's having to go into the city to work. You know how it is. And so she says, "Here, I'll buy the fish. Now you deliver it to the widow." And then she goes from every stall, everyone that has the last little bit they weren't able to sell at the end of the day, right before Rosh Hashanah. She buys the last thing, and she sends it all over to all these different people, and she comes home, and the samovar is more brass. And she realizes this is the immediate sign of Caritas. She's being given a guide on how to be this. And so their abundance continues. They always take just enough for their simple needs and then give the rest away. And 7 years later, And the man in the tall white uniform is at the door, and she recognizes him because he hasn't changed a bit. And he says, you have taken very good care of my son-in-law. I think I shall leave it with you. So, heartfelt acts, acting from the heart, feeling the connection, feeling the oneness with the source, allowing all the things that we've held against ourselves and everybody else to be cast away. Tashlik means cast away. It's done. Let's start a new year and be in a new world where we know that love is at the front of our minds. Thank you very much.